Welcome to the Stone Carvers Guild podcast. Here you will meet a variety of carvers working throughout North America. Drawing on our collective experience, we seek to share knowledge about this ancient art and to do our part to ensure that stone carving will play an important role in built environments for generations to come. So whether you are an experienced carver, new to the craft, or just curious, put on your safety goggles, open up your mind, and welcome to the workshop. I'm Bethany Lee.
And I'm Matt Johnson.
I'm Joel Norwood. Hey guys, welcome.
How's it going, everyone? It seems like forever since we've talked.
It
About
does.
a month. Yeah.
It was yeah.
Lots happened.
Do you think we should be releasing this like more like daily rather than monthly?
Let's let the listeners tell us. Let us know in the comments.
That's right.
Because I'm feeling a little bit of stretch in between each episode.
Right. We could tell
Daily
people that if
themes.
they review us, if we get 50 reviews before the next podcast, we'll do the podcast more often.
Only if
It
they're all
would take-
5-star. Yeah.
I
Right.
think we'd have like about a month and a half of runway as far as like stone carvers before we had to start repeating.
Really?
It would be short. 45, 50. Yeah.
Oh gosh, no. I think we've got a lot of people to interview. Actually, and I know this might be controversial, but we've got the guild members, right? But I got an email from a carver in Ireland who looks really interesting and wants to be on our podcast.
Shout out Ireland.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Oh yeah. We got lots of people.
We'll start a mailbag down the road here.
Yeah.
Reading our emails.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
good.
So how's your columns, Matthew?
Oh,
Aren't you carving columns, or am I just
capitals.
capitals? I'm sorry. Capitals. How's the capitals?
I don't do the columns.
Okay.
Would you say you're above the columns with your cat?
No, I wouldn't. I would never say that, but I do appreciate the humor.
All right.
Yeah, anybody that wants to really get the inside scoop needs to join the Stone Carvers Guild and then volunteer to be a part of the Stone Carvers Guild podcast.
Ooh.
And then maybe I will tell that story to them.
Well, that's why the guild was created, right? For the sharing of grievances, in
That's
some ways, the
right.
sharing of wins, as our
That's
guest
right.
today
Well,
talks
and,
about.
and some insider, it's interesting because Walter, our guest today, Walter Arnold, was talking about how the Italian stone carving tradition is kind of like they protect the knowledge and are very, very thoughtful about who they share it with.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that Nick Fairplay, when he was talking about the English, that it was a little bit less protective. That it was more like, take this.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Share this.
Yeah.
And I feel like I flip-flop. And today I'm feeling very Italian.
All right.
When you
No
ask me about my
secrets.
column capitals.
No secrets.
Yeah. All secrets. No,
All right.
all secrets.
All secrets. I mean,
All
yes. Right.
secrets.
Right.
Yes. So next question.
Joel, how's the letters?
Well, the letters are great. The letters.
I thought you said the weather.
No. We're not talking about the weather anymore.
The letters are good. That's it.
Good.
We'll leave it there.
Everybody's being secretive today.
What letters?
If anybody wants to see Joel's letters, follow Treasured Stoneworks on
At
Instagram.
Join the Stone Carvers Guild.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yes,
right.
that
And
too.
Yes, join the Stone Carvers Guild.
No, I'm missing. So I'm on serif land right now, and I love serif letters, but I'm missing some. I'd like to get into some more creative sans serif stuff here in my next project coming up. So, yeah.
I like serifs.
Oh yeah, they're beautiful, and they have their own personality. They need to have
There's a
life of their
functionality
own.
to them, dude,
Yeah.
isn't there? I mean, it feels like that they. I don't know what the function of them is. Do you know what the function of them is?
The serifs.
Is it just a style? For some reason, I have the feeling that it has to do it has to do with shedding of water. which is interesting because we were talking about that with Walter as well.
The relation between letter design and stone carving is an in-depth world, and there are many books that argue there is a reason for the serifs that relates to stone carving, and then there are some that say, from my reading, say no. It's just where the center line meets in this design, based after a brush design. So, that's in our next episode. We'll go into
like a calligraphy sort of.
Right.
A reflection of calligraphy.
Correct.
Interesting.
It'd be really interesting to have a letter carver on.
We have a letter.
I mean,
carver.
A real letter.
That's not what I meant.
No, just kidding. That's good. That's good. And get their take on pneumatic versus hammer. Well.
Oh
yeah, that came up today in today's conversation too. Wow, we're
very
exciting.
We're
really foreshadowing the conversation today.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that our conversation with Walter was fantastic, and I really learned a lot and felt like that the spirit that Walter brings to stone carving in America, it really is conveyed, I think, in the conversation that we had.
Yeah.
Just a lot of knowledge, a lot of passion, thoughtful.
Sorry, Bethany, I didn't ask you about your carving, I guess.
How the carving is going. I don't know if you guys have seen my most recent post on the forum about being very frustrated about not being able to meet deadlines.
Yes.
Which I have actually had some really interesting exchanges with people who've responded. And I even met with a local DC carver who I never met before today from that. So that was cool. But yeah, my life is, his name is James Natalia.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So that was really cool. He lives really close to me, and so he might come and hang out in my studio periodically. But I have this one half-life sized figure that is kind of never ending. It's a pointing project, and then I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this on the Stone Carvers Guild podcast, but sometimes when I do projects, I'll make the clay model and then I'll cast it in a material, like do the mold making and cast it in a material, and the cast material will be the final product.
I'm sorry, you're not allowed to talk
so I don't
about that.
carve it. It's just cast. So that's actually kind of what I've been working on lately. Is I've got a couple of, like, one that I just finished of a cast project and one that I'm just starting.
So going back to the workshop, shame. Going back to the workshop and the struggle that you have. I didn't jump into that conversation on the forum, but I did wonder, what is it that's like, what is the struggle?
I mean, it's not necessarily specifically stone carving. It's more, I guess, like a small business person / art entrepreneur problems, in the sense of, for other people who are basically sole proprietors who are learning, and I mean, you're building your skills. Every project that you do has some new sort of element, and so it's really hard to make reasonable expectations for yourself. And when you're working alone, like when I remember when I worked at Nick Fairplay's studio, like, he gave me the timeline, and then also there was guidance when I ran into problems. And that when you're working alone, you have to make your own timeline and you have to provide your own accountability. And so actually the reason that I reached out is that my younger brother is every month I have a board meeting with him. He's an entrepreneur. And I was complaining to him about this, and he was like, well, aren't there other people who do what you do that you can kind of compare notes with and like set goals together and keep each other accountable? And I was like, no, I am the only person in the world who does this. And anyway, he was like, I don't think that's true. Anyway, so yeah. Making schedules and keeping oneself accountable, and like other people.
I think one way to think about it, and I don't know how when I begin a project, the first thing I think about is like, okay, what are the different stages of this project? You know, like, okay, if I'm going to start with a 6-side cut, which is basically a square block of stone.
Okay.
The first thing I've got to do is put, different profile shapes into that stone.
Okay.
And what I do, because I work in a shop by myself, and what I do is I say, I need to have that done by Tuesday.
Okay.
And I just beat the shit out of myself if I don't.
That sounds healthy.
No. No, I just try to set those goals and achieve them. And it's okay. The negative side is feeling bad about myself, but the positive side is feeling good. Like, okay, I've reached that goal. It's Tuesday at it's Tuesday at noon, and I've reached my goal for the end of the day. So
okay.
now it's gravy. Now I'm starting on the next goal.
Oh,
okay. And kind of giving yourself just a sense of like, hey, here you're creating some milestones in the middle of the project, because sometimes we have a project. I was talking to my father-in-law. He was shocked that I work on projects that might involve like 100-hour long timeline, which is actually kind of a short timeline for some of the projects that we work on. But setting goals intermittently rather than thinking of like just beginning and then end, but like thinking of like the different stages is a way to motivate yourself through. I don't know if that's what you were talking about when you asked the question.
Yeah, that kind of thing, exactly. And I guess like how do you break down projects into reasonable milestones? And then and I think some people like can, as you say, beat the shit out of themselves until like to make themselves meet those. But also some people are just terrible self-motivators. Like me saying you must get it done on Tuesday doesn't mean I'm going to get it done on Tuesday, right? So there needs to be, it helps to have some sort of external motivation as well.
Sure.
Which but that actually is exactly what I'm looking for, is like that strategy. But it sounds like you pick the first step. Like you said,
the thing that defines it is my bidding process. So when I'm looking at a project and I'm thinking about, okay, how many hours is this going to take?
Okay.
Then what I'm doing during that process is saying, okay, breakdown. Like, okay, what is the breakdown going to be? Okay, it's going to be 2 days. What is going to be, say for an ionic capital, like how long is it going to take me to do a volute? Okay. What is it, and so then taking that, and that is a function of like being able to bid it in a way that, for me makes sense. And that might vary from person to person, but it makes sense for me. And then having those steps, taking those into the process of like, okay, am I achieving the estimates that I set for myself?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then if I'm not, I'm losing money.
Right.
And I'm falling behind. And I've also like promised this to be done by a certain point of in time. And then that's when I start to beat the shit out of myself.
So the accountability comes also from your clients, basically. Like
absolutely. Make promises make promises that terrify you.
That's good. That's a quick.
It is a good way to
make promises that terrify you.
Yeah. It's the inverse of like under promise, over deliver. It's then over promise and deliver.
And just do it. No. Well, that was interesting. Yeah. Not that it might. I don't know if it'll make it in the intro, but Bethany, was there any of that other advice that was that stood out to you, either in the chat or personally, or people reaching out to you after that?
Yeah, what was kind of funny is that most of the feedback that I got was people being like, "Yeah, story of my life." Which, to
Right.
Let
be
me know when you
honest,
figure that out. Yeah.
made me feel rather better. um, yeah, but
That
let's
seemed
see.
to be that seems to be like the story of every forum post that you start.
That's funny. Yeah, but actually, like Robin Antar. Well, okay, so Amy and Robin both said things about how, like, Amy said, well, that carving is a team sport, like sculpture is a team sport, or something like that. And that basically just having other people in the workshop with you is just a really great thing for the energy. And
Absolutely.
so yeah, so like yeah, and then but Robin actually, she basically said that no, she really likes solitude. And so it sort of actually started a little bit of a debate about like solitude versus like community. And one thing that's been super helpful, like I think I've mentioned that I teach a class once a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm super grateful for my students, like thinking about this subject, because for one thing, if I know that people are coming to my
You wanna
studio
yeah.
and they're going to pay me to teach them something, then it's something that actually forces me to at least clean up my studio so that it's not a complete trash heap. And then also it really energizes me. Like seeing them do stuff is really motivating. So I think for me personally that I'm definitely part like Amy's comment about sculpture being a team sport. I think there's just something really beautiful about the workshop, and that, yeah, I think that works.
We should get to it.
All right.
So our guest today is Walter Arnold, a founding member of the Stone Carvers Guild and the first president of the Stone Carvers Guild. How are you doing, Walter?
I'm doing good.
We were just talking about, before we started recording, about the history of the guild and when we got started. And I couldn't remember if we were officially an organization when we met at DeVito Stone in
No, we started in 2000. Basically, I'd been meeting and keeping track of carvers for years, and then I'd been down in Indiana and spent a day with a legendary carver, Jack Kendall, who had worked all over the country. And Jack was about 86 at the time. And he was telling me about wanting me to get an organization going just to get all the carvers in touch because there were so few, and just to keep the knowledge going. And so I had that thought and my mailing list in my back pocket, basically. And then one night, Dale Johnson gave me a call. He'd had the same idea. And we spent an hour and a half on the phone just brainstorming the whole idea. And, he was really pushing me on it. So I put together a letter, sent it out to everyone I knew. And I talked to Rainier DeVito of DeVito Stone and Marble in Pennsylvania. He loved the idea and offered to host us. So we went out there not really sure what we were going to do. Got together, had a fantastic couple of days just to be able to sit with people that you could talk about esoteric things, like the difference between a copper, a lead, and an iron hammer, things that nobody else cares about and that we can never talk with anyone else about. And, everyone sharing their experiences. Tim Doyle talking about things he'd learned because he learned from Jack Kendall, and talking about old machinery, and Michael Fannin talking about marble working, and Patrick Plunkett talking about how things were done in England. And so we realized we had to keep this going, and decided at that point that we would actually formalize and form a guild. And it took us a little while to figure out the structure, how we would do it.
Right.
But by the meeting the next year, which I think was the one in Texas.
I couldn't remember. That was in 2000?
Well, 2000
that was in 2000. The
2000 was
DeVito.
the first one with DeVito.
Oh, okay. All right.
2001 was Texas.
Okay.
And we'd pretty much decided on the structure and that we would be an organization. And I looked into how we'd become. We needed to become a nonprofit of 501c6, which is a trade association.
Right.
Because otherwise, if we collected dues or had expenses, it would be hard to deal with the funds without, a tax structure.
Right.
And at that meeting, actually, Matthew, you were sort of moderating the meeting, kind of, and along with me. And then I got elected as president and
Right. Yeah.
stayed in that position for 13 years until I finally twisted other people's arms so that I could bail out.
Was it 13 years? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
Oh wow. That is a long term. 6 years did it for me. I was I can't 13 years. That's amazing. And you're still so involved.
Well, in the meantime, I knew where all the bodies were buried, so I had to stay on as treasurer because I've got all the notes and the memory and the files and stuff.
Sure. Well, we were just talking about how 25 this year's annual meeting is going to be virtual, but the 25th anniversary is sneaking up on us.
Mm-hmm.
So if our first year was in 2001, that's the first official meeting was in Texas in 2001.
The first one when we actually called ourselves an organization. Yeah.
Right. So we still have time to plan a 25th anniversary meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really curious, Walter, back 25 years ago, before Instagram, how did you find other carvers? And the internet. I mean, the internet was around, right? But it wasn't as...
Well,
yeah.
First of all, I'd already been on the internet for a while. I'd started my website. I launched it in 1994. And so because of that, carvers all over had found me and gotten in touch with me.
Oh.
And then just, from various things, there's an annual trade fair, Stone Expo, that I'd go to each year and meet people, and people would tell me about carvers they knew, or occasionally carvers would show up there. And I'd kept track of everybody who I'd met or heard about. And a few other things, some people advertised in some magazines, and I'd see things there and give them a call.
And that's interesting. So you've always been a networker / community builder kind of person. Sounds like.
Other than not being very organized.
And back then, what were the things that people were looking for to connect about? Like you said, people to talk about esoteric things.
Just people who we could, we'd spend the whole rest of the year around people who didn't really know about carving or weren't really interested in the subtleties of different tools. And so to actually be with people that you could talk shop about, bounce ideas off of, find out how someone else did something, find something you'd been struggling to figure out, and then someone else already had an answer on it to sort of be able to share that information.
Yeah.
Do you recall any kind of aha moments of those interactions where maybe similar issues were being shared by other people in those early years of the guild or pre-guild, and you thought, this is exactly what I've been trying to get in touch with others about?
I just remember enjoying some conversations like that first meeting after the meeting when we all went to dinner, and Tim Doyle was talking about ways of lathe turning stone, and then I talked about different ways I'd seen it done in Italy. And other people who hadn't had much experience with lathe work were just and wanted to, were just sitting there sort of ears wide open, soaking it up.
I remember at that dinner, just because I was young, I was super young at the time, and I remember just marveling at like the different approaches, because up until that point, like my only exposure had been through Bob, and hearing about different ways to approach similar problems. It was pretty cool to like just sit and listen to you guys. Everybody there had years worth of experience, more than I did. So it was pretty amazing from that perspective, from a young perspective.
Yeah, going back 100 years ago, an apprenticeship would be 5 years spent in 5 different shops.
Right.
Because you learn a different approach from each person. And it's something I'd always tried to do, meeting different carvers, and especially carvers from other countries, because every country has different type of stone. And when you have different type of stone, it responds to tools differently. You develop different techniques, different types of hammers, different, ways of using the chisel. And so I'd always tried to get I always felt the wider the vocabulary you had, the wider your skill set, the more freedom you had to do anything.
Mm-hmm. That was something that Nick Fairplay was talking about, like the advantage of learning in a workshop with 40 carvers.
Yeah.
That just like it's so different than learning in a workshop with, even.
I remember once when I was at working on the Washington Cathedral, Vincent Palumbo, who was the master carver at the time, talking about when he'd been younger and working with some of the older master carvers like Roger Marigi and Vincent's father. And Vincent's comment was, you don't learn carving, you steal it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the old guys would be very taciturn. They wouldn't open up quickly. They'd wait years until they were convinced you were actually serious before showing you something. But you'd watch them and you'd steal a little idea from this guy, a little idea from that guy. And that's sort of what I've always done. What I did when I was 20 or 21 years old in Italy, I'd take breaks and walk over to other shops and just stand there and watch them, watch how they were holding the chisel, watch what they were doing, and try to steal ideas from each different person.
How did they respond to that?
It was really good because at the time, this was in Pietrasanta, which is a world center for sculpture and for marble carving. And there were sculptors and artists from all over the world who'd come there, but everyone would come there just to do their artwork or to learn enough skills to do their particular style or their particular thing they were doing.
Right.
Whereas there were only a few of us, like myself, Dan Sinclair, Fred Brownstein, who were really seriously learning to be artisans, learning to carve the way the carvers there would be able to carve anything you put in front of them. Give them a Madonna one day, a Henry Moore sculpture the next, whatever. They could adapt their skills to it. And so the fact that I was one of the only ones there who really showed them that interest and respect, and almost none of the young Italians were going into carving.
Oh.
None of their sons or grandsons were. So they wanted the skills to stay alive. I got known pretty quickly around town because it was a small town. Anything you did, any move you made, people would know, which was good and bad. But they'd take me aside, say, hey, let me show you this. I'm the only one who does it this way, because they wouldn't want to tell their secrets to someone local who would compete with them. But they knew I wouldn't be competing or taking work. So they'd all sort of say, here, let me show you. This is my secret. I'm the only one who does it. Next day, I'd be in another studio. A guy would say, here, let me show you. This is my secret. I'm the only one who does it. And it was the exact same thing.
Can you give examples of what those things would have been?
Oh, a different way of setting up the pointing machine for doing a bas relief compared with a piece in the round, or a different way of using a hand chisel, how you would scrape with it or drill with it. Drilling being spinning it in your hands, or different approach to how you lay out the points when you're pointing.
How long were you in Pietrasanta?
Initially, a total about 3 years. Halfway through, I had to come back to the States for a little while to earn some more money to live off of, although I was living very cheap there. In fact, my first year, I think, including transportation, housing, food, and buying tools, I think I spent $2,000
a year
for my first year.
Do you mind dating yourself a little bit and telling us what year that was?
That was, when was that? Mid-70s, early 70s.
Okay.
I mean, I was renting. I found basically things really clicked. I'd been trying to find a place to learn to carve in this country and couldn't find anything. I'd actually hitchhiked out to the Washington Cathedral when I was 16 and tried to talk Marigi into hiring me, which, if you imagine a very old school Italian and a young kid with torn blue jeans and long hair,
wow,
it wasn't going to happen.
Who did he trust to work there at that time? Was there anybody that we know that was working there already?
Vincent Palumbo was the youngest one there at the time. That was before Patrick Plunkett was there.
Okay. And before Malcolm.
Malcolm,
all
I don't know. Malcolm might have been. I don't know when he was white his ears were.
okay.
But anyway, I tracked down that there were things going on in Pietrasanta, went there when I was 20. And one of those times when everything clicks, within 3 days, I'd found a place to live, which was basically a big room with a concrete floor and 20-foot ceiling that was an old marble studio that had been swept clean and some of the broken windows fixed and a bathroom stuck on the back. And that cost me, I think, $40 a month rent.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was
No heat. And I'd been up to a town in the mountains, Pomizzana, where company Milani is based, a village way up in the mountains where they were blacksmiths. They'd make chisels, and I'd ordered a set of chisels. And I'd been given a chunk of marble that was a chip off of a 18 or 20 foot tall sculpture that someone was doing. And so this little chip off the sculpture was about, a 2 cubic foot piece of beautiful Carrara marble. And so I worked on that in my apartment there for the first month while walking around getting to know everything in town until I decided on which studio, and I practiced enough Italian for a few days to memorize enough to ask them if I could work there, and they said yeah.
Is Milani still exists, right?
Yeah.
And it's a little bit outside of town, but
way up in the mountains.
Yeah.
Fascinating blacksmith shop, because you get up, it's one of those mountain villages where you park on the edge of town. There's a parking lot, and then you walk up a narrow path into town and walk down a winding path and out the other side, dirt path over a wooden bridge and out to their blacksmith shop where they had all this huge equipment that they basically brought up one piece at a time and assembled.
How did they get their raw material? There was no road?
They had this tractor thing that was just like about the size of a lawn tractor, but I remember it was sort of a 2-wheel thing that pulled a trailer, and they drive it through that little path through the middle of town. And there was also a pulley system from the parking lot up to there, so you could attach things to the pulley and pulley them up.
Wow, that's fascinating. I mean, Milani is pretty well known as a brand. Have they grown a lot since then, or is it?
I'm not exactly sure what the details are, because I think it's sort of like split into 2 halves of the company, and one half is down on ground level and has a little storefront and sells things, and the other half is doing the manufacturing up there.
Okay. I wonder how much it's changed since then, and if it's still
the tools are still good.
Yeah. Do you still have those chisels?
Those, and some of the carvers I worked with there gave me chisels, and carvers I've met in this country. So I've got a lot, and most of my chisels are, at least most of my good ones, are 50 to 100 years old.
So you grew up in Chicago.
Yeah.
You hitchhiked to the National Cathedral and were rejected by Marigi,
yeah.
And then you eventually got to Pietrasanta and started to learn from the guys there.
Yeah, because
what was it about stone carving at that point?
I'd been trying to learn on my own. I got fascinated with carving very early on. My parents exposed me to all sorts of the arts, and it was sculpture that really clicked. And back when I was 13, I'd worked in an architect's office for the summer, earned enough to buy a bicycle. And after school, I'd go bicycle around the University of Chicago, which is collegiate Gothic architecture, looking at the gargoyles and wanting to do that. And hearing from everyone that was a dead art, no one did it, no one was interested. But I really wanted to. So at the time, there was what was called urban renewal going on in the south side of Chicago, which means they tear down wide swaths of buildings and then leave empty rubble for 30 years. And so I could go a block or two from my house with a wagon and come home with a few pieces of limestone off of those buildings. So I collected limestone. I tried to figure out what to use for chisels. I could get some things from art supply stores, but they were really, lousy tools. Whatever I could find and search for information, there weren't any books to be found on it because the people who knew how to carve didn't write books, and the people who wrote books didn't know how to carve. So the few sculpture guidebooks from the period basically are good on everything except stone, and they're way off base on stone, with one or two hard to find out of print exceptions, and even those are minimal. So basically I was trying to figure it out on my own. I was using those chunks of stone all through my teenage years, carving portrait busts of friends and family members, and hitting a dead end because I was trying to figure it out from scratch. I knew I had to find people from the old tradition who really knew how to do it, which is why I went to the cathedral when I was 16 and why I went to Italy when I was 20, to really learn from people who are out of a tradition, who'd learned from previous generations.
Why? I'm just curious, like, because Indiana is right there. I mean, the tradition was still going there, yes?
Yeah, very hard, especially with architecture at that time. It was very hard to find out anything that was going on. I did. No, did I? I don't remember if I was able to visit Gallois and Van Etten at that time or not till later. They're one of the 100-year-old stone yards in the Chicago area.
Right.
But the places that did it were sort of very, old line industrial places who didn't want kids coming in and poking around. And It was hard to even find out that they existed.
Right. Yeah. An ongoing issue.
Yeah, with the architecture at the time, most of their work was just, door frames, window sills, that sort of thing, even though they still had some good old-time carvers in there. And in fact, after I came back from Italy, I happened to meet somebody, got to talking. She was born in Italy. So as we were talking, we switched to speaking Italian, and she told me that her father was a carver and he had just retired. So this was after I was already back from Italy. I got to meet him.
And he was a carver in the U.S.?
He was a carver who had worked at Gallois and Van Etten in Chicago.
Okay. And so when you got back from, you spent, how long did you spend in Pietrasanta? 3 years?
About 3 years, but I've been going back ever since.
And when you came back, is that when you went to the cathedral, the National Cathedral?
Well, it took a couple years till, because the cathedral had done a big push in the 70s, building up to the bicentennial year of 1976, trying to get a big amount of work done. And they had a promise of a huge donation that suddenly fell through. And so they basically shut down midday.
Wow.
And it took them about 3 years to get the funding back and get organized. They kept Vincent Palumbo on through that period, but 1980 was when they started back up. And so in the interim, I was doing some, I set up a studio in my parents' basement, and I was doing some carving on my own and doing, working a supermarket to be able to eat, to be able to earn some money. And, found one or two sculpture commissions during that period also. And then I heard somehow that they were getting ready to start up at the cathedral. So first I went out and I met with Vincent. And then a few months later, he got word they were starting up. So first he called back Patrick Plunkett, who'd worked there before and had been working in Cleveland in between in a monument shop. Called him back, and then I was the next one he called. He called me on a Friday, and I was out there on Monday morning.
What do you think it was about stone that just grabbed you, even from an early age? It sounds.
I don't know.
There was something happening.
I often will have people ask me about how I found what I want to do, because people are searching for what to do with their life. And I don't know. I'm the worst person to ask because I never had that question. For most people, a question in life is, what or why. For me, the question was only how. The what, the why was like obvious by the time I was 13. So I don't know what led to that.
So what's the why?
Why? Because it pulls right from the middle of me.
Mm.
I don't know.
It's a tricky question, but
Yeah.
it does seem like that there was some powerful connection that you felt with just the material, but the tools too, and the whole process, everything about it.
I know. I remember a story when Vincent Palumbo first came to this country, and there was a carving contractor at a big lettering job there, and the guy gave him a tryout. And after a couple of weeks, there was a committee of carvers, senior carvers from the union, who came to take a look at what he did to see if he was good enough to let in. And the guy who owned the company said to them, I'm not supposed to tell you. I know I'm not supposed to influence this. I'm not supposed to tell you my opinion, anything, but I'll only tell you one thing. Il ragazzo è della materia. The boy is of the material. He has stone in his blood.
Mm.
The boy is of the material.
Yeah.
And how do you say that?
Il ragazzo è della materia.
Is that
the young man is of the, he's got stone in his blood. He's of the material.
Mm-hmm.
He's got what it takes.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's about, I don't know, it's in your blood.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I think it's interesting because we ask a whole bunch of the guests on this podcast that sort of similar question, and many respond to that. I can't explain it. It's just something in me.
Mm.
So it's
and I
to hear it recalled from you as well, Walter.
I think that there's some truth, but I think also like stone carvers just don't think about it.
They're too busy carving.
Yeah,
they're too busy like looking toward what's next and what is.
It's where I have a problem with this whole concept now in the art world, that you have to have your artist statement. That's the big thing.
Sure.
It's published
Absolutely.
on, everywhere. And I mean, a statement, if you could put it in words, then you'd be a poet, not a visual artist.
Exactly. I totally agree. I totally agree. So Bethany wants to know more about, she just texted.
Oh,
I was getting ready to ask this question, Bethany, but I realized.
Oh, you're the best, Matthew. Yeah. So I was thinking that, could we shift gears slightly? And you've been talking about learning in Pietrasanta, and you touched a little bit on the National Cathedral. And I know there's a lot of your life and various things you've done that we haven't really touched on. But speaking of techniques that you've learned and apprenticing in different shops, could we talk a little bit about so like in your studio, what do you have in your studio, and what can you make, and what are the specifics of how you approach stone carving? What are the things you've kept? What are the things that you've chosen not to do? Yeah, can you get into a little bit of what's your approach to technique? What tools do you use? What stone do you work in typically?
Well, what I've chosen not to do is granite and sandstone, because I like my lungs. Granite and sandstone shops, you need very extensive dust removal systems.
Mm-hmm.
Limestone and white marble are 99% calcium carbonate.
Mm-hmm.
I've been carving it since the 70s. I recently had some, CT scans on the lung, and they didn't find any scarring, any sign of anything in there. The limestone, it dissolves. You're basically breathing Tums or Rolaids.
Right.
So, and limestone and marble take the kind of work with a chisel that I like, the way the chisel will cut in it, the detail they'll hold, the way you can do undercutting. granite and sandstone work a bit differently, give different results, and that don't interest me as much. So my shop, I guess total I've got about 3,000 square feet. And of that, there's a 1,500 or 2,000 square foot space just for the carving, for the work. 7-inch thick reinforced concrete floor, very high ceilings. So I've had pieces of stone up to 10,000 pounds in the shop, which means like 6.5 feet by 5 feet by 5 feet, something like that. And, anything from that to things that are very tiny. And everything's set up so it's movable. So, I have tool carts that I can move around. In the shop, I move everything around on skids and with forklift. It's set up so I could add a gantry crane in the future, and there's room for it, footings for it, but I haven't done that.
Bethany and I have an ongoing debate about pneumatic tools versus hand tools.
It's the same chisel. It's just what's on the back end hitting it.
Yeah. My feeling on the subject is that, like, when the pneumatic is moving too fast for you to think, that's when it's time to switch to the mallet.
No, that's good because you don't want to think.
Yeah. Right. You want to move. If you haven't, yeah, exactly.
No, I'll go back and forth. I'll have the same chisel in my hand and put down the pneumatic and pick up the mallet and not even think about it, just based on which angle I am, where I have to get in. One will get into an area differently than the other.
Okay.
If the mallet's if the air hammer's moving too fast, you slow it down.
That's right. And that's what the exhaust is for too. I mean, there is a lot that the pneumatic hammer is a really beautifully designed piece of machinery, in my opinion.
One time at the cathedral, I was carving, and there's some tourists watching, and I was carving with the air hammer, and I set it down for a moment to pick up the mallet. The chisel didn't change. The same chisel was in my hand. And as I picked up the mallet, I heard someone say, "Oh, good, now he's going to start carving."
Oh, really? Oh, they thought you were like just dremeling.
Yeah. I mean, the pneumatic hammer was invented in the late 1880s.
I always tell people it's the newest technology that we have.
I mean, is there any other trade in the world where if you use technology that's 130 years old, people think you're taking shortcuts or doing something that's not pure?
So I'm curious.
My oldest pneumatic hammer is a 1902.
Wow.
And a few years back, Troy & Holden rebuilt it for me. They didn't charge me because they said it was still under warranty.
No.
Wow.
Way. That's awesome.
Wow.
So when you trained in Pietrasanta, they had pneumatic tools in those shops.
Oh, sure.
I would assume. So, okay. So I have a specific question then about pointing. Okay. And stone removal. Now, if you point, like if you've been trained to point efficiently and ergonomically correct, like you should be able to remove stone pretty quickly, right?
Yeah. In fact, one of the people I worked with initially, Mario Stefani, he was known for his ability to, they'd call him mangia marmo, eats marble, because he could tear through marble so fast, just with a 1.5 kilo or 2 kilo soft iron hammer, a point chisel, and a sledgehammer.
Okay.
And he'd set up a rhythm with it. I remember a couple of times he'd be up there carving, and the chips were flying, and the door to the shop was open, and tourists would come poke their head in to watch. So he figured they could watch for about a minute and a half till he figured it was enough. And then you wouldn't see anything change in his movement or what he was doing. But instead of the chips flying in one direction, they'd be flying towards the door.
Right.
Crowd control. Very nice.
So when the pneumatic hammer was invented, was it invented to make stone removal faster, or was it something else? Like if it was already, like if a trained carver was already good at removing stone quickly?
For the heavy rough out, and it depends on the stone. In marble, I'll do the heavy rough out with a hammer and chisel.
Mhm.
Was in limestone, I can move through it faster with a pneumatic hammer.
Okay.
It's just the nature of the stone, how the stone breaks and chips. But it's still, there are a lot of things where it's way faster.
Mm.
And also more delicate and more controlled. You might go 2 inches in the stone with a mallet and chisel. It's 10 strokes. So each one removes a fifth of an inch. With an air hammer, it's 100th strokes. So each one removes a lot less, but the 100 strokes
Oh.
takes half of the time of the 10 strokes with the mallet and chisel. So it's both faster and more delicate, more controlled for a lot of things.
Oh, interesting. So you would consider it both more efficient and more controlled in some
Yeah.
instances. Interesting.
It's really like the situation. It's if I hear you correctly, like that.
Mhm.
It's there are moments when a pneumatic can do a level of nuance
Yeah.
that a hand tool cannot.
Yeah.
But and
Yeah.
then vice versa.
Yeah. Each one has its times that it can cut through more delicately or more roughly.
Right.
Mhm.
But again, it's a matter of the more different skills you have, the more versatile. And I always feel that people need to start out first working just mallet and chisel, or if it's marble, iron hammer and chisel, for months and months of that, just so you get the feel of the stone, so you understand how it's going to chip, how it's going to break, how it's going to cut. And once you really learn it, then you can move on to the air hammer.
Mm.
Walter,
But
how often do you sorry to interrupt, how often do you sharpen your chisels? I think I saw.
Oh, I think I must spend a good hour a year sharpening chisels.
Right, there you go. Okay.
That's
I
but that's
mean,
because you're getting those good chisels made by at Bybee.
no, because I use those are carbide tip. The carbide tip chisels came in somewhere after, I think during or after World War II. And they're great for harder stone, for marble or harder stone, and great for roughing out. But for all the detail carving, I like a blacksmith forged tool steel chisel. It's just, it's thinner, it's more supple. It's a good one is really alive because a good one is tempered just right at the tip and then softer behind that, so it absorbs the blow a little bit. It's just a lot more alive.
Are you able to get them retempered ever, or do you have a hookup to retemper your chisels?
I can do it somewhat. I studied with a blacksmith in Italy for a few months, and I've worked with some blacksmiths in this country, and I know the concept, but I just don't do it often enough to be really good at tempering. I'm okay at I know what shape I want, but I'm not real good at tempering. I need more practice at that, but I do have a blacksmith set up in the back corner of the shop.
But there's not a blacksmith that that other people can access.
I had a good one here in Chicago for many, many years who made a lot of tools for me. He was a third generation German blacksmith, grew up with it, but he passed away about 8 or 10 years ago, and he was in his mid 80s at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you currently like to get your tools?
From your shelf.
I've been hoarding tools and hunting for tools my whole life. And so
I've heard about your workshop. I think there's a lot of tools in there already. Yes.
Yeah.
I think and I mean I hope one of the benefits of this podcast will be to help people with sources of various things. But I know for tool sources in this country are limited, and it seems like the best place, at least what I've found so far, is to find carvers who are retiring and buy them out. But that's that's not always predictable.
That's very hard to find them.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I know. I haven't seen how the latest. I know a few years back, Troy and Holden was working on developing some limestone chisels because their whole focus has always been, granite and somewhat marble. And the chisels are fatter and blunter. They're not the long, thin, drawn out ones for limestone.
Right.
And they were having myself and another person try out a few chisels. They sent some and we'd give our comments. But I don't know if they ever developed. I should give them a call, find out if they ever developed their limestone chisels that they were trying to do.
But Bybee is still active.
Yeah, Bybee's active. They make very good tools, but it's...
I know Dan has retired, correct?
Yeah.
But his son is taking...
Okay. I'm not sure if they do. I'm not sure what they do in terms of tempered steel. I know they can do
They
some.
don't do nothing. I don't think
No, they don't. So it's only...
It's carbide tip. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And there's some good places who make good carbide tools, but for granite, like some places in Georgia and Troy and Holden and so forth.
Yeah.
And there are a few good sources, out of England and Italy and perhaps France.
And as far as the stone that you use, do you use Indiana limestone from Indiana and like marble from some nice place, or do you do a lot of do you do some local stone that's a little more or like what sort of range of stone
I've occasionally used Kansas limestone and Texas limestone. There are a couple types from Kansas that are good. A number of things. Matthew knows more about it from Texas. And there's some other limestones and some other marbles in this country, but mostly I try to stick with Indiana limestone because it's the most reliable and consistent and most suited to the type of carving that I like doing.
The thing that's beautiful about Indiana is that it has like such a nice color, and there's the variance in the it's got a warmth to it. But it holds an edge. Like Cordova cream in Texas is beautiful, but sometimes it won't hold an edge.
And Indiana, you can do a lot with texturing, with
absolutely,
with all different textures from smooth to tooled, and I'll do a lot of that using textures to create shadow. Because really, in carving, and especially in architectural carving and in sculpture, you're not working with form; you're working with light and shadow. Because that's what people see, especially architectural, high up in a building. They look up, they see the highlights and the shadow. So you learn to do all sorts of little tricks of, putting edges on, putting tooling or texturing in the undercuts, the angle you go with the undercut and such to make deep shadows and strong highlights.
What's your philosophy approach to lighting the project while you're working on it? Do you have a lot of natural light in your workshop? Do you make sure it's from a kind of a similar stance, of course, as its placement is expected to be?
Well, I do have a lot of light, and the shop is all fluorescent lights, which are, I think, 5200 or 5600K, something, so it's natural daylight. But I also have a huge overhead door with a concrete apron outside. And basically, I'll finish something and then wheel it outside and go, oh no, when the sunlight hits it. And I plan on that. On having to do another day or two work on it outside, especially on the larger pieces, because they always look differently when you get them out in the sunlight and at different times of day.
It really is amazing, like how it changes, like when you put it into a different, like into the natural light, or it's kind of amazing.
I remember hearing a story from an architect years ago about a stone building where the stone they'd gotten was very rough. The building was clad in stone and it was a mess. So they sent somebody up with a grinder to smooth off the whole face of the building, and it looked great. And they came back the next morning when the sun was hitting from a different angle. And
yep, right.
Everyone just, oh my God, no.
Huh.
Yeah, you got to be careful. I thought that story was going to end that he had to keep grinding until the building was gone. Because there's definitely been times when I felt that way, where I thought, I keep cutting it away.
So when you came back from, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bethany.
You let me have the last question. So
yeah, you go first. You go first with your last question.
We try to have controversies on this show, but we're just all too nice. So I was just curious, after you came back from Pietrasanta and then you said you worked at the National Cathedral. So what were the things that you learned working for yourself that you just had to learn by experience versus the things that you learned from other people? Like, is the bringing it outside thing, was that something you learned from like by making your own mistakes, or?
No. Well, every job I do is something new. So even now, every job I do, I'm having to solve new problems and learn new things. And that's part of why I left the cathedral when I did. I was at a point where the work, if I stayed there, I'd be doing more of the same thing I'd already done. And instead, by coming here, I'm forced to do, get outside any comfort zone and do very different things all the time.
So what are you working on right now?
I've got 2 models underway that I'm in discussion of, tree stump monuments for cemeteries, which I really enjoy doing. Tree stump tombstones were really popular back about 1880 to 1920 or 1930. And then kind of faded away, but I still get to do them. And they're great because it's just a lot of very flexible freehand carving. I've spent too many years doing very precise things like fireplaces where you're spending most of your time focusing on getting the 16th of an inch exact on a molding or on, measuring and drawings and meetings and such. Whereas this is work where I can just spend all my time just pure carving. I just recently finished another gravestone with an half-life size angel. So I've been doing more figure carving lately. I'm working on a piece right now with a woman's face surrounded by, flowers from grape leaves. So it's both got carving a face and carving lots of foliage and lots of detail.
The tree stump monuments that you've been doing, one of the things that I remember when you I guess maybe a couple of years ago, you were talking about how when carved correctly, they shed water.
Oh, it's one of the things that was
key. That is
one of the things that was drilled into me when I was on the cathedral with exterior work and architectural work is it always has to shed stone. So no matter how ornate it is, I have everything sloping down so water won't puddle.
Right.
Because if the water puddles, in the winter you get freeze-thaw expansion that'll crack the stone. In the summer it'll sit there and soak into the stone, collect mildew and insects. So as long as you have a piece that's going to shed water, Indiana limestone will last hundreds of years outdoors.
If it's carved correctly.
The problems I've seen with it have always been due to it being either carved or installed in a way where it just gets soaked with water.
Right.
And isn't able to drain or shed it.
And what's the symbolism of the tree stump?
A lot of people say it's a symbol of a life cut short. And there are whole books about cemetery symbolism and about what every flower and every bird and insect mean. And I'm aware of that. I've got the reference books, but I'm not so concerned with that as with it just being a beautiful memorial to a life and something that allows for a huge amount of personalization. You can incorporate, I'll talk to clients about, what flowers they liked or what, pets they had or things like that, and try to incorporate all kinds of personal symbolism to help tell their story in it.
That's interesting. I mean, just driving around and looking at cemeteries, you'd think that unique gravestones or figurative work for cemeteries was just completely dead. I mean, I'm just actually paging through your website right now, and I see a lot of memorials and gravestones, and that's really good to know that stone carvers still make gravestones.
The majority of cemetery work is really mass produced. It's sandblasted granite, where the only hand part is peeling the back off the sandblast stencil as it comes off the computer and sticking it to the stone. And then it goes through a conveyor belt through a computerized blasting machine. And so there's still some handwork going on. And it's always good to have individual things. I always have to check when people approach me. The first question is to talk to the cemetery, because a lot of cemeteries have really strict rules. And a lot of cemeteries have been bought up by a couple of corporations. And when a corporation owns 500 cemeteries, they want every gravestone exactly the same distance apart, because they're buying 500 lawnmowers at a time, and they want to calculate how many square feet per hour a minimum wage employee can cut with the minimum amount of times that he has to turn the steering wheel.
Right.
And so decisions are made by that, not like, in the old cemeteries where it really was a garden and a social gathering place.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find that out through trial and error, or was that something you were thankfully alerted to before first?
I guess just from enough time hanging out with enough people in different aspects of the trade, a lot of granite people, a lot of cemetery people, and they talk about it all the time.
We're getting close to an hour, but I'm just curious, like, what do you feel? You've done so much. You've accomplished so much. You've moved a whole generation forward as far as stone carving. Is there something that you feel like is still undone? Is there something that you are striving to, you still want to make happen?
Carving has been with us since the earliest times of recorded history. Our oldest records come to us through carving, and it's been through, every culture all over the world, every time period. It's always adapted and adjusted and fit to new things and kept going. And it still has a place and will continue to have a place in the future. So I just wanted to, people to continue to be interested and respect new innovation within old paradigms, and to keep it going forward and doing new and different things.
Mm-hmm. And when you say new innovation within old paradigms, are you talking about tools or processes?
More about design and ways to use it to communicate and ways to use it to tell the story. Think about how carving was used in a different way to tell stories in the 1300s or in the 1800s or in the 21st century.
Right.
It's just a method, a type of three-dimensional visual communication that has a foundation in the planet that the stone is from, and in a combination of skill and creativity. And the more skill and creativity you can put into it, the more creative it can be.
It is the artist's statement.
Yeah.
That was really great to hear. Do you have any advice that comes to mind for the aspiring stone carver? I mean, you've had quite the journey getting into this world yourself.
It's difficult because when I did it, it was so hard to find anyone who knew and to find the tools. And it's even harder now because there's so few people out there. At least now it's easier to find stuff with Instagram and YouTube and such, although you have to be, selective on who really knows what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. But it's easier to discover wonderful carvers from England or from Indonesia or Italy or other places and see examples of their work. So while there's less going on, it's easier to find it in a way.
Thank you, Walter.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
And, we really appreciate it. Mm-hmm. And I love this microphone that you got. I'm so glad that we did this because your voice is it's got a nice timbre to it. Timbre. Yeah.
Timbre? Timber or stone?
I think a timbre.
I don't do it
right in between
carving.
Yeah.
Timber is just to build crates to ship the stone.
You know,
There you go.
we're going to have to ask you more questions, but we're going to go through a couple of more carvers before we have you back on. But thank you again.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed
Have a
it.
good night.
You've been listening to the Stone Carvers Guild podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you will find us online at stonecarversguild.org. There you can find photos showing some of the things that we discussed today, additional information about our guest, and if you're so inclined, ways to get more involved with the Guild and our ongoing activities. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, we hope that you will subscribe and rate us on the podcaster of your choice. 5 stars, please. We'll be back in a month with a new episode, so until then, keep your hammer up and your chisel sharp.